Have you ever noticed how the specific words we use during a crisis completely shape how we perceive reality?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Welcome to The Deep Dive. I'm your host, and today we have a truly fascinating stack of material in front of us.
We really do.
We are looking at raw news transcripts from the BBC alongside some really detailed linguistic analyses of modern conflict.
Right.
And our mission today is to view the escalating conflict in the Middle East through a very unique educational lens.
Specifically, the English language of war.
Exactly. We are going to extract the gist of the news, break down crucial English vocabulary and sentence structures, and analyze these global events from multiple perspectives. It's almost like a masterclass in reading the news.
It really is a masterclass. I mean, when you look at the exact grammar, the vocabulary choices, and the phrasing used by politicians, the military, and journalists, you start to see the invisible scaffolding of the narratives you hear every single day.
Yeah, totally.
We aren't just looking at what happened. We're analyzing the linguistic mechanics of how it is being reported to the world.
Now, before we jump in, a quick note. Our sources today contain highly politically charged content and cover intense geopolitical conflicts.
Very intense.
Yeah. And we want to be absolutely clear that we are not taking any sides or endorsing any of the viewpoints presented. Our goal is strictly to impartially report on the content provided and help you understand the language and ideas contained in the original source material.
Right, strictly educational.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the language of absolute authority. When I was reading through the statements made by U.S. President Donald Trump regarding Iran, I was immediately struck by the complete absence of traditional, polite, diplomatic language.
Oh, the contrast is jarring.
Yep.
Especially if you're used to standard international relations discourse.
Right, because normally world leaders lean heavily on highly manicured, cautious phrases, right?
Exactly. You hear things like, we urge all parties to de-escalate, or we are actively exploring diplomatic avenues.
Yeah.
That kind of language leaves space for negotiation. It leaves room for a retreat. But the rhetoric we are analyzing here is entirely stripped of that nuance.
Complete.
From an English language perspective, using extremely simple, direct, and final words serves a very specific psychological purpose. It constructs an undeniable sense of authority.
I'd love to look at the specific vocabulary doing that heavy lifting. The linguistic analysis we're referencing points to a category it calls verbs of finality.
Verbs of finality, yes.
Trump repeatedly uses words like surrender and phrases like lay down their arms when directly addressing the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and the police.
Think about the worldview those verbs construct.
Yeah.
A word like surrender instantly strips away all the intricate, messy complexity of a decades-long geopolitical standoff.
Right.
It forces a deeply layered reality into a rigid binary framework. You have absolute winners and absolute losers.
There is one phrase in the BBC transcripts that really jumped out at me in that regard. Wiped out. Trump claims that, in the view of U.S. forces, 2/3 of Iran's missiles and launchers had been wiped out. He doesn't say their capabilities were degraded or compromised.
Right, those are the typical military terms.
Exactly. But wiped out gives you this mental image of an eraser completely removing something from a chalkboard.
It implies a total lack of resistance, too. And notice how he pairs those verbs of finality with what linguists would categorize as adjectives of absolutes.
Oh, right.
He claims that Iran's Air Force and Navy are simply gone. He talks about the total demolition of the enemy.
He even throws in the word guaranteed.
What's fascinating here is how this specific language creates a forced black and white binary choice.
Yeah.
He tells the Iranian forces they can either accept total immunity or they will face absolutely guaranteed death.
Wow.
By attaching absolute modifiers like total and guaranteed to the outcomes, the speaker positions themselves as the ultimate author of reality. They are asserting complete control over the future. It's a rhetorical strategy designed to make the opposition feel entirely powerless.
It's wild how that absolute tone bleeds over from the battlefield into political leadership, too. The transcripts highlight his use of the word decapitation.
Yes.
Normally, that brings up a very literal, gruesome image. But Trump is using it to describe a geopolitical strategy. He compares his approach in Iran to what he claims to have done in Venezuela, insisting that he must be the one to appoint the successor to the assassinated supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
The vocabulary there reveals an incredible shift in the underlying power dynamic. He is discussing the internal leadership succession of a sovereign nation,
right?
But he's using the lexicon of a hostile corporate takeover. It's the language of a CEO restructuring an unruly department, not a diplomat engaging with a foreign state.
Which perfectly explains the two incredibly specific words he uses to describe Khamenei's 56-year-old son, Mojtaba, who is seen as a potential successor. Trump calls him a lightweight and says his appointment would be unacceptable. He even throws out a threat that if Mojtaba takes over, the U.S. would be back to war with Iran in 5 years.
If we look at the sociolinguistics of those word choices, it's a textbook example of an above to below tone.
Then above to below tone.
Exactly. Lightweight is a dismissive colloquial insult. It's usually reserved for someone who simply doesn't matter, and unacceptable is deeply paternalistic.
Right. It sounds like a teacher talking to a student.
Exactly. It's the vocabulary a headmaster uses with a misbehaving student, or a manager uses during a bad performance review. He isn't addressing an equal on the world stage. He is using English vocabulary to actively assert dominance, linguistically treating an international crisis like he's reprimanding a subordinate.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because while the political rhetoric uses these broad, loud, absolute strokes, the actual terminology used to describe the military strikes on the ground flips entirely.
Completely flips.
The language becomes hyper-technical and almost clinical. If you are watching the news right now, understanding this specific tactical lexicon is the only way to decode how modern asymmetrical warfare is actually being fought.
The shift from emotional, authoritative rhetoric to clinical precision is one of the most striking things about modern conflict reporting. Let's look at the phrase aerial bombardment.
Okay.
This phrase shows up frequently to describe the massive strikes that wiped out those Iranian missile launchers. From an English teaching perspective, this is a brilliant example of nominalization.
Nominalization.
Yes, turning a verb into a noun.
Oh, I see. So instead of saying the Air Force bombarded the base, which has an active subject doing a violent thing, and they say the base suffered an aerial bombardment.
Precisely. The noun bombardment sounds almost like a weather event. It implies a continuous, overwhelming phenomenon over a wide area, but it magically removes the human beings dropping the bombs from the sentence entirely.
Wow.
It sanitizes the violence for the reader.
That makes so much sense. We see similar technical distancing with the phrase air defense systems. The BBC reporter in Tel Aviv described hearing loud explosions echoing across the sky. Those weren't the sounds of missiles impacting the ground. Those were the air defense systems intercepting incoming threats mid-air. It frames the military action not as fighting, but as a technological shield operating autonomously over a city.
But penetrating those shields requires evolving weaponry, which brings us to a highly controversial term. We need to break down cluster bomb warhead, or cluster munitions.
I've been seeing those terms everywhere in the coverage lately. What exactly is the mechanical difference between a cluster munition and a standard bomb, and why does that difference matter so much in the reporting?
A standard bomb is designed to hit a specific target and detonate in one massive explosion.
Okay.
A cluster munition, however, is a delivery mechanism. It's a warhead that opens up midair while it's still descending and ejects hundreds of smaller explosive devices.
The bomblets.
Right, often called bomblets, over an incredibly wide area. The BBC transcript notes that Iran's Revolutionary Guards used a cluster missile against Tel Aviv.
So it's about the indiscriminate spread of the explosives.
That, and the lingering aftermath. The crucial context here is that the use of these weapons is heavily restricted by the International Convention on Cluster Munitions.
Right.
Because the bomblets frequently fail to detonate on impact. They essentially turn into landmines that can harm civilians for decades after conflict ends. However, the reports highlight a significant legal loophole.
Which is?
Iran is not a signatory to that treaty.
Ah. The technical vocabulary also highlights how fast the nature of the threats is changing. We keep seeing the phrase anti-drone capabilities. The focus isn't just on traditional fighter jets and ballistic missiles anymore.
No, it's shifted. The transcripts detail how British Prime Minister Keir Starmer sent Wildcat helicopters specifically equipped with anti-drone capabilities to the RAF Akrotiri base in Cyprus.
And the catalyst for that deployment was incredibly specific. A drone believed to be launched by Hezbollah in Lebanon managed to slip past traditional defenses and punch a hole straight through an aircraft hangar at that British military base.
Exactly. Traditional air defense systems are designed for large, fast-moving missiles.
Right. Not small, low-flying, agile drones. So they had to rush in specialized equipment to counter this entirely different type of asymmetrical threat.
It's a whole different ballgame.
It really is. And for anyone listening, recognizing these terms, aerial bombardment, cluster munitions, anti-drone capabilities, is essential for media literacy. Understanding this exact vocabulary helps you decode your daily media consumption.
Absolutely.
It moves you past the simplistic headline of Country A attacks Country B and helps you grasp the specific, highly tactical, and often automated nature of how modern wars are executed.
But of course, there is a very human reality beneath all of that clinical, technical jargon. We've talked about the political posturing and the sterile military tactics, but we have to shift our focus to the civilian impact.
We do.
And reporters use very specific linguistic structures to convey panic, urgency, and the human toll of this conflict. The scale of that toll is immense. The reports cite nearly 800 dead in Iran since the start of the escalation, the U.S. claiming over 2,000 military targets hit, and mass, chaotic evacuations taking place across Lebanon.
You'll constantly hear the news use specific geographical phrases to describe where this collateral damage is happening, heavily relying on the terms crowded residential areas and southern suburbs.
Yes.
For example, the coverage mentions the gutted Azadi sports complex located in West Tehran, explicitly noting it as a crowded area. And in Beirut, the focus is repeatedly on Dahi, situated in the southern suburbs.
When journalists deliberately insert the phrase crowded residential areas, they're actively pushing back against that clinical military language we just discussed.
That's a great point.
They are grounding the narratives. They're ensuring the reader remembers that these strikes are not happening in isolated, barren deserts. They are happening in neighborhoods where families live.
It really changes the emotional resonance of the reporting. And one of the most fascinating parts of the linguistic analysis we reviewed is how it breaks down the way journalists construct the narrative of an emergency evacuation.
Right.
They use very deliberate sentence structures to build tension. I'd love to walk through how this narrative is built in English.
It generally follows a reliable four-part grammatical structure.
Okay, let's hear it.
Step 1 is the trigger. The reporter establishes the cause of the panic using strong, absolute adjectives. In the BBC report from Beirut, the trigger is described as an unprecedented evacuation order.
Unprecedented.
Right. By choosing the word unprecedented, the journalist immediately signals to the reader that the established rules of normality have been broken. The scale is massive. Israel told people to evacuate roughly half of the entire city of Beirut.
Wow. And step 2 is the chaos. Instead of just stating the fact that people left the city, reporters use highly evocative noun phrases like chaotic scenes and a mass exodus.
Exactly. The word exodus carries heavy historical and biblical weight. It doesn't just mean leaving. It implies a desperate collective flight of an entire population.
Step 3 is the urgency. This is where the sentence structure itself highlights the stakes, often relying on conditional clauses. The authorities were, quote, telling people to leave immediately if they wanted to save their lives.
That if clause is chilling.
It really is.
From a linguistic standpoint, conditional clauses usually offer a choice. But here, the grammar of the sentence, if they wanted to save their lives, presents a choice that isn't really a choice at all.
Yeah.
It makes the life or death reality incredibly stark. The reporting notes that some families in southern Lebanon were given barely half an hour to pack up their entire existence and flee.
And the final step, step 4, is the human impact. This is about bringing the macro-level geopolitics down to the individual. The reports describe thousands of civilians fleeing for their safety, only to realize, in their own tragic words, there's nowhere else to go.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. So what does this all mean? Why break down the news like this?
Well, it means that when you read an article, you can see how the writer is consciously constructing empathy and urgency.
Yeah.
They're using these specific steps, the trigger, the chaos, the urgency, and the human impact, to bypass the sterile numbers and make you, the audience, feel the visceral reality of the conflict on the ground.
It's powerful.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we are looking at a profound contrast. On one hand, we have the extreme, unyielding certainty of the political rhetoric we saw with Trump.
Right.
On the other hand, we have the incredibly messy, chaotic, deeply human reality on the ground. And sitting right in the middle of these two extremes is the murky, heavily debated language of international law.
The legal debate here is massive. Over just 6 days, the U.S. and Israel carried out more than 2,000 strikes on Iran. They assassinated leadership, they destroyed naval assets, they crippled air defenses.
Mm-hmm.
And the overarching question hovering over all this reporting is simply, is this legal?
And depending on which perspective you examine, the vocabulary used to answer that question changes entirely. Legal language in warfare isn't just descriptive, it's prescriptive. It's used to legitimize or delegitimize state violence.
Let's look at perspective 1, the United States justification. Trump's argument relies on a very specific legal phrase. He claims the overarching objective is eliminating imminent threats.
Imminent threats.
Now, the word imminent is the linchpin of modern military justification. It implies that a danger is so immediate and certain that you have no choice but to strike first.
Right.
However, the BBC's diplomatic correspondent explicitly points out that the U.S. provided no evidence of what those imminent threats actually were. And broadly speaking, no one in the diplomatic community thought Iran was planning to attack first.
The weaponization of the word imminent fundamentally changes modern geopolitics. If a nation can define imminent loosely enough, it essentially grants itself a blank check for preemptive military action without needing to build a consensus or present evidence beforehand.
Which clashes violently with perspective 2, the United Nations and international law. Their vocabulary is entirely different.
Completely different.
They reject the word defense completely and instead use the term armed aggression. They label the attacks a serious violation of international law.
The specific battleground here is Article 51 of the UN Charter.
Right.
This is the internationally agreed upon legal framework that allows for the right to preemptive action in self-defense. If you have undeniable proof that an attack is truly imminent, Article 51 says you can strike first to defend your nation.
But the analysis we are reading states quite clearly that there does not appear to be any sound basis for invoking Article 51 in this scenario.
None at all. The analysts draw a very sharp contrast to the geopolitical landscape 23 years ago. Back then, the U.S. spent months painstakingly taking its case for war with Iraq to the UN Security Council.
Trying to build a legal foundation.
Exactly, however flawed it may have been. But this time, there has been no such effort. The U.S. simply decided it had reached its limit, declared the threat imminent, and commenced the aerial bombardment.
Which brings us to perspective 3, the UK's stance, which uses a slightly different flavor of justification. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer relies on the language of prevention and regional stability.
Yes.
He defended the decision to step up military defense, like deploying those extra Typhoon fighter jets to Qatar, by stating the ultimate goal is to stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon.
What's particularly revealing about Starmer's rhetoric is how he addresses the domestic backlash. The reporting highlights that public opinion polls show this war is highly unpopular in the UK.
Yeah.
Critics are calling the government's response tardy.
And rather than arguing about whether the response was slow, Starmer pivots. He explicitly states he doesn't govern based on public opinion polls. He claims he follows his long-held views that Iran is a major danger to global stability.
By anchoring his policy in his long-held views, he attempts to reframe an unpopular, potentially reactive military deployment as a principled, steadfast stand for global security.
That makes sense.
Ultimately, the synthesis of all these perspectives shows us a stark reality about modern conflict. International law is frequently sidelined.
Yeah.
The majestic phrasing of the UN Charter, words like imminent, self-defense, or armed aggression, they often become mere tools for political justification after the bombs have already dropped, rather than a strict set of rules that constrain behavior beforehand.
It's incredible how much weight a single word like imminent carries when you pull back and look at the global machinery.
It really is.
Well, let's briefly recap this linguistic journey we've been on today. We started by looking at the absolute verbs of political ultimatums, words like surrender, wiped out, and guaranteed death that construct a rigid black and white reality and leave zero room for diplomacy.
We then decoded the tactical, technical jargon of modern combat. We looked at how a phrase like aerial bombardment sanitizes destruction through grammar, and we examined the very real, terrifying mechanics behind clinical terms like cluster munitions and anti-drone capabilities.
From there, we analyzed the emotional grammar of a mass evacuation. We broke down the four-step narrative structure, the trigger, the chaos, the urgency, and the human impact that the media uses to convey panic and tragedy when families are forced out of crowded residential areas.
And finally, we waded through the ambiguous, heavily debated legal phrasing of the UN and international law, exploring how the definition of self-defense versus armed aggression is hotly contested, and how a word like imminent can be weaponized to bypass global consensus.
And this is exactly why this deep dive matters for you. By understanding these specific English vocabulary words and narrative structures, you aren't just improving your language skills, you are gaining a superpower.
A literal superpower.
You can see past the noise, you can decode the political spin, and you can truly understand the machinery of how global news is constructed, sanitized, and delivered to you. You are no longer just a passive consumer of information. You are an active, critical analyst.
This raises an important question.
Oh, I love where this is going. What's the question?
Well, we've spent all this time dissecting the language of war. We've seen how meticulously it is crafted. It's designed to either sanitize destruction using clinical detached terms like aerial bombardment, or to force absolute submission, wielding phrases like guaranteed death.
Right.
So if the vocabulary of conflict is this rich, this specific, and this powerful, what would the vocabulary of true, lasting peace-building sound like? And why do those words seem to be entirely missing from our daily headlines?
Oh, wow. That is exactly the kind of thought we want to leave you with today. Keep listening, keep analyzing, and keep questioning the words you hear. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
喜欢这种学习方式，欢迎订阅我的频道，让我们一起用下一个10分钟，把商业英文变简单。